ICP is just an assumption until outbound actually happens. Silence doesn't mean that it's not going to close. Silence can be a good thing. I'm not going to paddle hard for a wave unless I understand that the break is going to be there. There's always going to be another wave.
This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejillo. Today's conversation is about outbound, but not the kind you usually hear about. My guest today is Toan Dang, someone who spent nearly 2 decades in outbound sales, not just running plays, but surviving them. Long before outbound became a discipline full of tools, dashboards, and frameworks, Toan learned it the hard way through pressure, uncertainty, and the need to make a judgment call when there was no playbook to lean on. In an era where sales teams have more data than ever, more signals, more activity metrics, more automation, outbound somehow feels harder, not easier. And Toan has a sharp perspective on why. He argues that the real bottleneck in modern sales isn't effort or messaging, but decision making. Knowing what to do matters sometimes less than knowing when to do it and when not to do it. Toan is also a surfer, so we'll explore the parallels between outbound and the ocean, patience, timing, reading signals, and the discipline of knowing when to paddle hard and when to wait. This is not an episode about doing more outbound. It's about doing it with better judgment. Toan, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Mateo. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's an honor to be on your podcast and yeah, just talking about the future of work and just life in general.
Very good. Let's start with your story. How did survival shape your early years in outbound and how that turned into a craft?
Yeah, so I think I got into sales really, really early. I was a young man, but I think it was really about survival. Folks that kind of just land into sales, just kind of walk into it. But I think it was really a matter of when you're a young college student, right, in your early 20s. And I think it was just really about survival and ambition. It really allowed me to speak to people, connect with people. And so when I first started out with sales, it was strictly outbound. I had no inbound leads. I had no connections. I had no experience. Um, but I think the drive of being able to speak to people and to connect with people in ways that you can offer a service and just really clearly define what your objective is was really important. So I caught on pretty early. It was all pattern recognition, a lot of dials, just cold calls, no training whatsoever. But essentially, I found that there was a process, right? My own process that worked for me. And that was just a lot of repetition over and over and over again, right? Connecting with different people, but also using specific language to be able to communicate with someone over the phone in ways that you can't use, signals that you can see, right? Body language, presentation. But I think it was really about a matter of, my own intuition and being able to understand that, when to engage, what to say, right? And then having empathy when you're speaking with somebody and what they would think and how they would perceive you based on that conversation, right? So I recognized really early on, but it took a lot of grinding, right? That's sales, right? It's 100% grinding, activity based. And so earlier in my career, it was just intuition, gut feeling, and then a lot of repetition, and then seeing what worked and what didn't work, right? And then yeah, so it was an incredible experience early on because I think survival, right? Being able to survive, it's like fight or flight mode. So you really have to pay attention to whatever cues that you can get, right? And then being able to understand and internalize that as you continue, building your craft. So I think starting out, it was like exploratory, but then I found a pattern, I found a rhythm, and then I also found more learning and understanding of who I am and what my strengths and my weaknesses are, right? Sales is a very humbling, very humbling profession, very humbling craft. But I think that early on in those days when I was cold calling a lot, and I still cold call, but it was a huge learning experience because then it was developing me into my path, right? Kind of finding my identity. So early on, it was quite a grind.
So, Tuan, that's an amazing experience. What do you think fundamentally feels harder today, even with better tools and data?
Right. Yeah. So I started in sales with no CRM, right? Just calling off of a book, right? And then the next era was actually having a CRM, which was some type of software, whether it's like, notebook, a notebook, and then you're moving on to a spreadsheet or something like that, right? Uh, and then going into sales engagement platforms, right? That next era. And then the era that we are in today, right, is the AI era, right? It was the information era. Now it's transitioning to the AI era. So I think, the way that I've changed, right, and the way that people have changed in general in the marketplace from 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, it's completely changed because we have access to a lot more information, but we're also expected to do more with less, right? And so I think the today in the age of AI, right, it's still kind of transforming. It's still in the early days, but I think what's most difficult is that there's so much information that is out there, right? There's so much things that you can do, so many things that you can, research, so many things that you can learn. Like I can go online and learn about, you know, uh, uh, infosec, right? Like computer engineering. I can learn how to engineer. I can learn how to learn about the different protocols for cybersecurity, like immediately, right? So Google offers all these different courses, right? But how do you define what you're deliberately going to do next? And so the hardest part about today, especially for salespeople, is that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of data that's out there, but how do you turn that into meaning? How do you turn that into something that you can leverage so that you're deliberately acting within alignment of your objective, whether it's to sell, whether it's to build rapport, whether it's to learn, right? But I believe that it really does take clarity. And a lot of times our attention span, especially with social media, right? We grew up with social media, right? And so you can see that today. There's so much things that you can do and so many things that are pulling you and pulling your attention away from your key objective. So as a sales professional, the way that I see it is that there's too much noise in the marketplace, right? In terms of internally as well as externally, right? And so that really puts sales professionals in a position, the ones that have more clarity and that are aligned with what they are doing and what they want to accomplish and how to actually leverage the information and the technologies of today will actually have a better advantage. So the difficulty was that it was really, really simple. When I first started, it was simple. There wasn't so much, things that were pulling me. I could just call somebody, right? And then not only that, buyer trust, right? And people that are buying software, for example, there's a lot of information that's out there that is being produced, that's being automated, that may not, you know, you know, be for them to be able to extract meaning and value from, right? And so I think buyer trust today is also very difficult, right? So there's a lot of noise in the marketplace. There's a lot of things that are pulling people from their attention span, and then in terms of a buying environment, there's a lot of noise and a lot of distrust, right? Because there's the AI and obviously you know a lot of messaging that is kind of similar in terms of what companies are saying and the types of language that they're using. So how do buyers actually find the right fit? Buyers have changed, and so the way that they've changed is really to be more closed off. and really to find more resources or a network that is high in trust that gives them the information that they need so that they can do their job, right? And so just imagine yourself being a buyer and you're looking for something, especially something that's very high risk. Where would you go for that, right? It's likely your relationships that you currently have, the existing vendors. You're going to go to analyst reports, or you're going to, from previous experience, right? So that's how, like, in terms of outbound, how are you going to overcome that, right? How are you going to overcome and building rapport when people are not looking at their email or not even picking up their phone? How are you going to overcome that? How are you going to sell, right, at the end of the day? So I think and I think, speaking to my own colleagues and to people and my peers in the industry, I believe that for them too, it's very difficult. And so it takes a different strategy. I believe it takes a very different strategy to stop and pause, and it takes humility to stop and pause, rather than grinding it out, rather than doing more activity, more calls, more emails, right? And you're just kind of banging your head on the wall, and really getting the same results. So that's what's, and we'll see where it goes, right? We'll see what happens, but I think it's become a lot more difficult.
So I heard some people talk about instead of go to market and just, some people are claiming cold outbound is dead. Some people are claiming email outbound, like just calling is like super dead. Some people say, I don't know what you think. Email kind of, going down. And it's all about networking and relationships. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's the way to go? And how do you personally go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, relationships are key, right? Definitely key, because it's gonna be able to, because of the trust factor, right? I think as an outbound sales or a sales professional, however, I believe that especially if you're a founder or maybe you're building a new territory or you're building a new company for as the first early GTM hire, I believe that it's not sustainable in terms of your own network, right? That's why, companies especially enterprise or any software company or any mature company, right? It's always trying to build your network, right? Obviously start off with the people that right, that can get you in and build those connections. But I think in terms of scalability, that's it may not be scalable, right? Because if you're planning on hiring someone to do exactly that, they may not have a network, right? But not only that, I believe that outbound is definitely not dead. Cold calling and emailing is definitely not dead. It just takes a little bit of a different focus, a different shift in terms of what your overall strategy is going to be. And that's going to take more refinement and thought into having clarity with what your assumption is as far as your ICP, right? And then being realistic about your product market fit in terms of what you're offering to customers, in terms of the problems and solutions that you're solving, but also having a plan and a mindset to be able to experiment. Because I believe that, especially founder-led sales, right? They may not know, or may not have a full GTM strategy or an outbound strategy, right? Outbound is a component of GTM, but it is also a very big component of it. It's the beginning of your GTM, and it's also, the way that I think about it is that, your ICP, right? Founders get in trouble in terms of, they're building product, right? But they're building product for themselves that they understand. They have it all in their head, right? And so how do you communicate that to somebody? How do you communicate and externalize that in terms of, incorporating that into your overall GTM strategy? How do you find customers, right? So it takes a lot of truth and honesty to be able to realize that. But then outbound, right? It's also very difficult because that's the perception, right? Just because I know, I built a product or a service, I'm an expert at it. How do you communicate that to somebody that doesn't know, right? And then how do you train somebody to sell that for you? But I think, like, in terms of cold calling and emailing, it really starts from the beginning and really understanding the nuances of how people are going to perceive your messaging, but also, being a lot more directed in terms of crafting the messaging, uh, aligning the messaging with your core products and services, and then experimenting on your personas, the people that you think that might be a good product fit for them, right? And so the way, like I had mentioned before, ICP is just an assumption until outbound actually happens and you actually execute your sales strategy because the honesty and the truth will eventually come back, right? The market is going to tell you whether it resonates, whether your product is validated, or if it's not validated, right? So it's definitely not dead. It just takes more time in terms of your overall strategy and more clarity and more alignment with more purpose and acting deliberately of how you're going to, execute an outbound strategy.
For founders testing outbound early, what's the most dangerous false positive, and how do you avoid scaling that?
I think it's there's going to be a lot of false positives. You know, depending on the types of people that you're speaking to, right? What is your sample size? How many people are you speaking to, right? And not being able to like as I had mentioned before, it's an assumption. You know, your ICP is an assumption. You're building your product for yourself and you know it the best, right? And so empathizing and understanding that it's a big world out there. And in order for you to scale your business, you need to be able to experiment with a wide audience, and then not making the first assumption of your ICP the source of truth, because time changes, right? People change, the market changes, the market reacts. So you have to have an understanding and a self-awareness of that. Um, but so not, like what worked today may not work tomorrow, right? And so being open to understanding that it is a very dynamic market, but also it's not static. Your product may fit now for one or maybe one group of people, right? But then there's going to be changes, right? How are you going to be able to adapt? So I think where the false positives come into play is really treating your ICP and your product market fit as the source of truth, uh, and then kind of not being able to adapt if you're not successful in terms of scaling your business, and what is that reason, right? What is your overall strategy? And so I think it's being really really adaptable, but that the false confidence, where they kind of get into trouble is that they're not thinking bigger. They're also not uh, executing the strategy, and then assuming that it is the truth.
And do you think that also plays a role in having the wrong metrics? Sometimes you can have the wrong metrics, and that, do you think that will burn people out if you don't adapt and change strategy on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, salespeople are burnt out. I know it. I was one of them. I was one of them. Um, like I've never really focused too much on the activity rather than the outcome, right? But like if you're hammering out 100 calls, right? Maybe 50 calls. I think the average people, average senior folks or people that are, in the business, as far as what they're doing, maybe 50 calls. I think 100 calls is a lot, right? 200 calls, right? But I think if you have high performing salespeople and they are getting stuck, right? And they're going back to what they know. What their overall sales execution isn't working because the market has changed, and so they're reverting back to what they know. And a lot of salespeople like to keep it simple, right? They say keep it simple, just trust the process, right? Right. But I think it takes a level of humility to take a step back and actually think about what you're doing. And that's also thinking about your overall strategy. What you may think that what may have worked for you before may not work for you now, right? And so I think a lot of salespeople, when they run into that phase where it's they're not learning, they're not experimenting with different strategies, and then they assume that their previous experience where they were successful, and then now they're actually reacting to the marketplace. I think if they focus too much on their calls and on their emails that are not getting the results that they want, it's going to burn them out, right? Because there's going to be high anxiety. There's also going to be a sense of urgency, right? Because that's the nature of the profession, in order to create opportunity. But then they're also managing and juggling so much information and so many different deals and opportunities. For example, how do they context switch? So there's a lot of friction in that area where they're making a lot of decisions, and then they're losing a lot of context in terms of what they're doing, and how they're doing it, right? So there's context decay. I like to say context decay, rather than time decay, right? Because we all know that if well, we don't all know that, but the saying goes that if you're working on an opportunity and a client doesn't respond and it takes a long time, right? They would assume that that's actually a deal that may not close, right? So they probably won't forecast it. But the thing is, silence doesn't mean that it's not dead, or it's not going to close. Silence can be a good thing. And so reacting to that signal in terms of, why is there silence? Well, there's probably friction on the other side. Maybe they need to take time to think about it. And I think salespeople need to take a step back rather than focusing on the activity and just continue to hammer in the phones, leaving voicemail. That can really be detrimental to not only to their emotional intelligence and their mental load and their cognitive load, but to their opportunities that they're working, right? It can actually hurt them in that regard. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we can do, but there's a lot of different ways and strategies that you can think about, rather than ingesting and kind of assuming those signals are actually bad, right?
I have an oddball question here, but um, how can you tell when it's time to call it off? Meaning, I'm in sales, and sometimes numbers. I might not be hitting numbers because of me, because I'm not on a good time, or because I don't know, whatever, I'm not doing the right work. And sometimes it just might be the product, right? Um, how can you tell? How do you realize, like, okay, it's really not me, this is very tough to sell, or the industry has changed, or the wind is blowing elsewhere. I don't know how to put it, right? But how do you make that call?
So I think good sales, right? Good salespeople really take ownership, of the opportunities that they were given or the opportunities that they take, right? I think having agency in terms of building your career or building the future that you want. Um, I think that I think top performers, they internalize that philosophy of creating your own luck, right? So I think, but it sets a precedence, right? If you are, you know, making, I'm going to be direct, right? Making excuses in terms of your success and your failures rather than taking ownership of it, it's going to hurt you. You're not going to be able to learn, right? You're not going to be able to take a step back, take that opportunity to stop and really think about what you're doing, right? But I think for me, I've had that happen as well, but I never put the blame on anybody else. I never put the blame on the product. I never put the blame on the customer. I never put the blame on anything that's outside of my own control, right? What I can control is to, work with what I have, right? I play poker, right? I play poker, so play the cards that you're dealt, right? Or right in life or as a sales professional, you can actually, even have more of an edge to think about, a rolled up ace of spades. You can have a rolled up ace of spades, and how can you have that? Is to be able to understand where you're going and to deliberately go where you want to build a future, right? That alignment. So rather than working or selling with, maybe like, rather than acting because of time constraints or acting with urgency, stop, evaluate, right? Take ownership. What are you doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? What can I control, right? What is the market doing? So I think really good salespeople really kind of look into the details. If the if they're blaming I think good salespeople, top performers, they're not going to blame the product, even though yeah, maybe the product's not fully built out yet, right? But in sales, how are you executing that, right? How if I had a product that's not fully built out, how am I selling it? That's going to change. Going into an opportunity, I would already understand that the product's not fully built out. There's a lot of competitors that are out there that are competing in the same industry, right? For the same type of attention for the people that you want to talk to. What's going to separate me apart from them? Because not every product is the same. Not every salesperson is the same. And so you have to really kind of have clarity on where your strengths are, right? And if you're a salesperson, that's if in sales it's a game changer. It's really a game changer because you're speaking and connecting to people, right? And so like that's what I say. If you're focused too much on the metrics rather than actually focusing on your own strengths as a professional, and then focusing on the client and how you're going to deliver value, and then what is that vision, right? Starting off with clarity. How do you actually describe your product? How do you describe your philosophy? How do you describe your what value that you bring? And then that's really a lot of differentiation when it comes to other competitors in the marketplace. The salespeople that have more clarity, that brings more clarity in how they explain and how they communicate the value and that vision, they're the ones that are going to win, right? They're the ones that are going to win, especially if they deliberately act and see and understand the marketplace and their customers. If they understand their customers very, very well, and the questions that they ask and how they buy and what they think and what they're concerned about, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes a lot easier when you have that clarity and you're fully 100% aligned.
Tuan, what's a belief about Outbound that you held for years and only recently realized you were wrong?
That's a good question. Wrong about a lot of things. I failed more than I failed a lot, many times over, right? Failed a lot. Again, it's a very humbling experience because, like I mentioned before, thinking that an ICP, right? Thinking that I know who's actually going to buy because I have that idea in my head, right? Sometimes that can be very prideful, but again, sales, who cares? Who cares? Let your ego go, right? Like let it go because you're going to get hung up on. People are going to reject you 1,000 times even, right? I closed over, like thousands of deals. And if you can imagine how many failures I had to go through in order to close thousands of deals, it's likely, 10, like maybe hundreds of thousands of calls throughout my career. Hundreds of thousands of hangups, right? People, right? Different reactions that I did not think that I was going to get because I assumed that they actually wanted to talk to me, right? But I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is what you think is not the truth. You really have to go out there and you have to find the truth, right? And so, if you're path locked into that way of thinking, where you're not learning and you're not testing things and you're not aware of your activity and how you're actually executing, you're gonna run into issues, right? The sooner so like the lesson that I learned is that I thought I knew what I knew until I was humbled, right? Until I failed over and over again. So treat sales as not a single source of truth, right? Because like I don't know a lot of things and I failed at a lot of things, right? But going through the repetition of failing a lot, what I've also learned is that I've learned to recognize that within myself, and I've also learned to recognize that those patterns within my own profession. So I see it, right? I see pattern, and also in addition to that, it's like your own gut feeling, right? It's like I think really good salespeople that are very good with that have been doing it a long time. They have an intuition, right? They have it all that context stored in their head, but that is also not the truth, right? Because you have to adapt, right? You have to adapt because things are changing. They're changing very, very rapidly.
You're also a surfer. What has surfing taught you about patience, timing, and reading signals?
Surfing's taught me a lot. I've been pounded. I've crashed many times. The wave in the ocean, they'll treat you the same, right? They'll treat you the same as anybody else, and that's the marketplace, right? That's the world. The ocean is very much. It's taught me so much, and surfing's changed my life. To be honest, with you. I traveled traveled to Southeast Asia, many different parts of the world. Surfed at Uluwatu, surfed in Karamas and Canggu, surfed in Vietnam, Thailand. Obviously all parts of California, Seattle, and Canada, and Mexico even, right? But like that drive of being connected to the world has taught me a lot. But in terms of drilling down and thinking about how it has impacted my craft and my profession, uh, I see it as patience, right? Being able to read the wave, being able to understand the conditions, being able to be, to go out there even if you're afraid, right? Because there are different conditions, but it's also a learning experience. And if you're at your local break, right, or a break that you're regular at, these conditions they change all the time, right? It's where the rip current is, it's where the wave breaks. It's about the swell, right? It's also the timing of when these sets come in, right? So in terms of like surfing, one aspect of what it taught me is that I'm not going to paddle hard for a wave unless I understand that the break is going to be there. So I just sit back, right? And sit back. I don't need to act because there's a nice wave coming in. There's always going to be another wave. But for me, I have limited amount of energy, right? And so what I'm doing, my overall strategy is just to wait and just really enjoy the moment, to be present, and then really to be one with nature, right? Right? To be one with myself, and then being 100% locked in when I'm actually out there. And so I look and analyze the sets and the timing, and then where people are, because some waves can be, some local beaches can be very crowded. I want to make sure that people are safe, that I'm safe, but ultimately I want to catch the best wave, and that takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of focus. And so really being patient, timing and not acting, right? Waiting, right? Restraint. I think restraint and not acting is a strength, because when I do act, when I do paddle out, I know I'm going to ride that baby. I know it's going to be a good one, right? And so when I ride it, it's the best feeling in the world. So that's what surfing has taught me.
And so, if you had to sum it up as a life mantra, when do you paddle hard and when do you wait?
That's a good one. When do I paddle hard? I think, I mean, I paddle hard all the time, especially if you're in Northern California. You have to, because you're literally working
True,
your
true,
biceps and
true, true.
arms and everything, man. So just to stay in one place. So I'm paddling hard all the time, and that's like, but I'm paddling harder when I know that there is the right set for me, that's coming in, that where I've timed it right and I've studied it. But I try not to especially when you're in Ocean Beach. I mean, it's really gonna just pull you south all the way or even out to the ocean, right? So I'm always paddling hard for sure. And that's also the other thing, right? I mean, you always have to go hard, but it's also when do you choose the time to exert the most amount of effort? uh, because what I've learned in sales and doing a lot of activity and analyzing a lot of information, just like surfing, you're always paddling hard. You are, and you're going to be limited to the amount of energy that you have and the amount of brain power and cognitive load that you have. There's a capacity to it, and you have to understand that. But I paddle really, really hard when it's a 100% sure thing, or 80%, right? Like I have a lot of confidence into it, right? And then being able to understand the waves. So that's when I paddle hard.
I love it. Tuan, this has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate it. I thank you again for being on my show. I hope we can stay in touch. I hope maybe one day we can surf together over there or
Absolutely.
here in Uruguay. And we can do this again sometime in the future.
All right. Thank you so much, Patel. Thanks for having me.